Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited for the conversation that we're going to be having, but we're going to give everyone a minute or two to go ahead and join. So if you need to grab some water, grab a snack, go ahead and do that, and we'll get started in about 90 seconds or so. All right. Well, it looks like we have a great crowd here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for our webinar today about navigating program maps. Really excited to see this great group here. So if you'd like to take to the chat and introduce yourself, tell everyone where you're coming from, what institution you're at, that would be great. And we'll go ahead and kick off with some introductions now. So hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran. I'm our content manager here at CourseDog. So I'm focused on all things content and research, kind of looking all across the spectrum of academic operations, whether that has to do with program maps, scheduling, curriculum management, all of that good stuff. But I'll go ahead and pass it over to Claire now to introduce herself.
Thank you, Bridget. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Claire Genre. I'm head of product here at CourseDog with a mission to improve student success through academic operations. I grew up in a family of teachers and have always been amazed at the impact that education has on people's lives. So I'm really looking forward to discussing this topic with you all today.
All right, great. Thanks, Claire. Well, before we dive into things, I wanted to give a quick overview of what we're going to be discussing today. So first off, we're going to spend some time talking about the urgencies that are really driving institutions to increasingly focus on developing and then actually implementing those program maps. Then we'll talk how to think about selecting courses for those program maps and how to identify any barriers that may exist when going through that process. Next, we'll spend some time going over why schedule optimization is important to promote course accessibility for program maps, particularly when thinking about our underserved student populations. And then finally, we'll discuss the elements you need to consider when creating and advertising your curricula as part of a program map. And a couple more things I wanted to note here. We will be doing a few polls throughout today's sessions. We love to get audience feedback, kind of hear what you all are up to at your institutions. So we're definitely looking forward to that. And then one last final thing I do like to know, we will send out the deck and the recording of this afterwards. So you will have that for your reference. No need to worry about that. All right, well, with all of those logistics out of the way, let's go ahead and dive in here. So as I just mentioned, we're going to spend the first part of today looking at some of the pressures and challenges that are really driving institutions to focus on program maps. We'll talk about some of the challenges that come with program and course selection and how program maps aim to address those challenges and really help students throughout their journey. So I think it's important to begin with, why are we talking about program maps today? And I think this probably won't surprise most of you, but I think to simply put it, students are really overwhelmed by the amount of options that they face. Not only do students have to choose from a bewildering array of courses, but oftentimes these choices can feel somewhat random. Students might struggle to see how these courses cohesively come together and lead to outcomes such as attaining certain skills, transferring to a four-year institution, or landing a job in a certain field. And students also often have little guidance on how to navigate the multitude of courses they have to choose from. And we know that first generation underserved students are often most likely to suffer from the consequences of the confusing amount of options they have to choose from.
Now, a lot of us know this to be anecdotally true, but let's look at what the data says on how students feel about program and course selection. I recently came across these results from a survey that Illusion conducted of 1,000 students in the United States, and the results were pretty telling. Now, almost 2/3 of students felt overwhelmed by the process of selecting a major. When broken down by age, 63% of millennials and 68% of Gen Zers reported feeling overwhelmed. Now, when it came to seeing the connection between their academic program and career path, 1/3 of surveyed students were unsure which program even aligned with their chosen career path. And again, younger students in the Gen Z group were most unsure of the connection. Only 62% of Gen Z students were confident in their program choice. Now, I think this is concerning because we know that changing programs can have detrimental repercussions for students. Changing programs can have consequences such as needing to take extra courses, delayed completion, and increased tuition. Now, the same survey actually found that 39% of students that changed programs had to take additional courses, and 28% expected their completion date to be delayed by 2 or more semesters. And this just has to do with program selection. We haven't even gotten to course selection yet. Now, you'll see some similar themes here about course selection, as students just aren't always sure about what courses they need to take. 1/3 of students in the same survey reported that course requirements for their given program were not clear to them. Similarly, 1 in 4 students said that prerequisites were not clear, which informs the order in which you need to take those courses. So clearly something isn't working if this many students have trouble understanding which courses they need to take. Enter program maps, also sometimes called degree maps or pathways, depending on your institution. They're part of an effort aimed at simplifying student choice, making the connection to learning outcomes, and providing students with support. The idea here is that rather than providing students with what some refer to as a cafeteria style of course options, students are now presented with a tasting menu to select their courses from. So when students are deciding between which courses to take or program to enroll in, they're also now given concrete examples of learning outcomes. They're able to see what program completion will lead to, whether that is employment, transferring, or continuing on to another credential. Finally, institutions following models that align with the guided pathways reform aim to provide students with support every step of the way. This includes not only helping students choose and enter a program, but also helping them navigate course selection for each term, assisting them with developing a personalized academic program, and providing career support every step of the way.
Thanks, Claire. That was a super helpful overview. So I think with all that out of the way, we can now move on and talk a little bit about how we can use data to align curricula and identify barriers that may be living within how our current curricula is structured, and how we can really transform that into more navigable program maps. So specifically, we'll be looking at which courses should be included in program maps and types of hidden barriers to look out for. And then we'll also look at how scheduling data can help you support some of those decisions. I know the process of deciding which courses to include in a program map can be pretty overwhelming for administrators as well. For GE courses alone, one study I read found that community colleges on average require students to select a dozen courses from a mixed bag of 162 approved courses to meet general education requirements. So that's a lot to go through for anyone, students or administrators. So to help make sense of which courses to begin with, I think it really helps to start with those non-negotiables. So you'll see at the top of the slide some considerations in order from most to least stringent. Obviously, accreditation requirements and transfer requirements will guide which courses are non-negotiable in your program maps. From there, it's important to examine recommendations made by local employers or any industry councils or advisory boards that you may have. And And then, of course, existing completion requirements at your institution can help provide a framework to work off of. I think what's more interesting here, though, are the considerations to select courses that really promote student-centric outcomes. For example, many institutions have hundreds of general education courses that students can choose from. When deciding which one to include in a program map, institutions should examine past student success in those courses that you're considering. This might include looking at transcripts of alumni that successfully completed the program, DFW rates, completion rates, or the number of attempts it took a student to successfully complete that course. And next, including courses in the first term and year that can be easily transferred to other programs. By shepherding students into courses that count towards multiple programs, students have more time to explore their interests. And then if they do decide to switch a program, they won't have taken those courses for nothing and fall behind. I was reading a study the other day by two professors at Kansas State that highlighted just how many students actually do change their program. The study found that 50% of students at community colleges entering STEM programs either changed programs or left the program altogether. And this was also true for 57% of students entering health sciences programs and 45% of students entering social and behavioral sciences programs. And finally, I think the final thing to call out here is really early exposure to discipline courses. This is so important as it allows students to gauge their fit within the program. It gives them an opportunity to see if their interests and strengths align with the program that they intend to complete. And it's especially important for programs with requirements to actually get accepted into the program, such as perhaps nursing or other health sciences programs. These guidelines for deciding which courses to include are a helpful starting point, but I think it's also equally as important to think about what shouldn't be included in a program map. While creating program maps can be quite the process, I think it's also a really exciting opportunity that institutions have to identify barriers or hidden requirements that may have previously flown under the radar. Starting on the left, the program mapping process is a great opportunity to identify courses that are rarely or maybe even never offered. And once these courses are identified, institutions may be able to remove them from the catalog and cut down the number of options that students are presented with. Next, this is an opportunity to identify courses that haven't been looked at in a while and perhaps no longer meet industry standards. These courses should be examined to figure out whether they need to be updated or maybe in some cases discontinued. And then on the top here, you'll see hidden prereqs. I think this is a big one and really important to think about. If students are unaware that certain courses can serve as prereqs in order to progress, they may not register for that course. And then it's only until they attempt to register for that preceding course that they find out they're ineligible and may have to pause their progression until they complete that prereq. Prereq courses should be publicly noted in all areas where students may access curriculum and program requirements, including the catalog, website, and degree planning tools. Next, courses that count towards both GE and program requirements. I really love this one because I think it's a win-win. If students are aware that a course will count towards two requirements, they not only stay on track for timely completion, but they also avoid potentially taking unnecessary credits. Finally, on the slide, you'll see here elective courses that aren't eligible for transfer requirements. And I think this can be a tricky one. Institutions should examine transfer requirements for other institutions within their state higher education system or institutions that their students commonly transfer to, and ensure that elective students complete will count towards transfer requirements. If an elective won't count towards a transfer requirement, students should know this up front so they don't complete that course, and then only find out later on that they'll have to take a different course to fulfill that requirement and potentially delaying them in their journey. All right. Well, I know that was a lot of talking on my part, so I would love to hear from you all here. I know we just discussed some of those barriers that can come up when it comes to program maps. So I would love to hear from you all. What have you been finding out, when you've been going through this journey of creating program maps? What are some of the barriers that you've uncovered? Would love to hear from you all. We'll keep the poll open for about 60 seconds or so everyone can get their answers in. All right, I see the responses coming in. We'll keep it open for just a little while longer for anyone that hasn't had a chance to select their responses. All right, very interesting here. So it looks like we have a couple that are coming to the top here in terms of barriers most often uncovered. So first, courses listed are rarely offered. Yep, I think this is a great one because, in the case that when a course maybe isn't offered at all, the professor teaching it is no longer at the institution, pretty low hanging fruit to be able to actually remove that from the catalog and reduce the number of options students have to filter through. So I really love that one. Looks like another one coming to the top here. Students are unaware of courses that might count towards both GE and program requirements. Yep, I think that's really great and love to see that a lot of people are uncovering this in their process. Claire, does anything here stand out to you that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, no, thank you. These insights are always great to get. And to be honest, these do not come at a surprise. I think what we've seen is these are very common pain points in institutions' journey through program mapping. But unfortunately, what we see is typically they don't have the data to be able to proactively identify these and fix them. So really going through this process is a great opportunity to try to gather this data and identify these barriers here.
Absolutely. And Claire, I think it's so relevant that you bring up that data piece, since that's actually what we'll be talking about in our next slide here, using scheduling data. I think this is a really exciting opportunity, particularly when institutions are thinking about using degree audit data. I think this can provide some really great insight into what successful program maps can look like. So this data, when you're looking at historical degree audit data, it can show you, what courses students have taken to successfully complete that program. And this helps administrators build program maps that take into account considerations such as, which courses are popular for students to take to meet a given requirement, which courses are most likely to lead to success, when milestone courses should be taken, and then which courses should be taken together in a given term. However, on the flip side, it can also be helpful to analyze the schedule of students that didn't successfully complete the program or perhaps transferred to another program. This helps administrators understand where students are more likely to struggle. And this could include, courses where students most frequently struggle, course combinations with poor success metrics, and where students are most likely to stop out of a program. Building these program maps predicated on successful completions doesn't just help give students a helpful program map, but it then also helps schedulers understand what courses and how many sections they should be offering each term to meet the student needs of students who are following these paths. All right, so continuing on the topic of scheduling, I'd love to spend some time now thinking about schedule optimization and how this can really help promote pathway accessibility. This is a topic we spend a lot of time thinking about here at CourseDog, very passionate about it. So definitely want to make sure we cover this. And we'll be looking at a couple of different areas, including course access considerations, particularly when thinking about underserved student groups. And we'll also talk a bit about block scheduling and some more of those scheduling metrics in detail we should be looking at to make sure that students are able to access the courses they need to stay on path. I think this quote here really exemplifies why program map creation within itself isn't enough to keep students on path. So the quote here is from Davis Jenkins at the Community College Research Center out of Columbia, and He noted that while, program maps do provide better information, it doesn't necessarily change the student experience. So that's why we're going to be discussing why scheduling is equally as important when making sure that students can actually access the courses they need. Of course accessibility can impact all students, but I think it's no surprise that oftentimes they have an outsized impact on students that are most underserved. And I know we could probably talk about this slide all day. There are so many different examples, so I'll just touch on a couple here. I know oftentimes when I talk to administrators, they often tell me that they're particularly worried about employed students being able to access the courses they need while also balancing their job. And will these students be able to take all the courses they need, say either before or after they go to work? Many of these students can't afford to be on campus all day and, have their classes spread out over 7, 8 hours. Other students might be disproportionately impacted by scheduling errors. So, for example, if two required courses are accidentally scheduled at the same time, students are forced to choose between courses and, as a result, might not be able to take a full load. This can impact students that need to maintain a certain load to qualify for their financial aid. Similarly, if courses with variable units are marked incorrectly, students might find out only after they've registered for the course that they won't receive the number of credits they expected. And while these errors thankfully don't happen very often, when they do, it can have pretty large ramifications for our underserved students. And I know this slide certainly doesn't cover all the various student groups that we could talk about when it comes to course access. I've heard concerns about course access for students that might commute home on weekends, gap year students, student athletes, and so many others. So I know we just talked about a couple of different groups of students that we need to take into account, but I want to dive deeper into the needs of just a few student groups that often come up in my conversations. So first off, students with children or caretaking responsibilities. They often have additional time constraints that come with those caretaking responsibilities, and they need to be able to complete their courses during school hours. Institutions with large populations of students with children should consider questions such as how far away are local K through 12 schools from your campus? What times are those schools in session? And do those schools or other local organizations offer childcare before or after school? For example, I was talking with a community college administrator recently, and she was telling me that many of their students have children that go to local schools. And to accommodate this large population of students, they're introducing scheduling bans that allow students to take all the classes they need between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. After those classes finish up at 2 p.m., they'll then have enough time to go pick up their kids from school. As I mentioned on the previous slide, employed students are another population that often have additional time constraints. And there are a couple of different ways institutions can really support those students, such as looking at what types of industries they work in, major employers in those industries, and perhaps what those local hours of operations are. Next, how are students that rely on public transportation able to access courses? Do courses begin, say, before the first bus arrives? Or do courses end after the last public transportation leaves? And perhaps if that bus doesn't arrive frequently at night, will those students have a safe place to wait after their course ends? And the final group I want to touch on here is low-income students. I think it's really important that institutions think holistically about course access and how other services on campus relate to those times. So, for example, can students easily access tutoring services or technology labs before or after their scheduled classes? Will cafeterias or food carts be open and near where those courses are offered? I want to now talk a little bit about transfer students, since I think this is another group of students that oftentimes can really be helped or hindered based on course accessibility. Selecting and enrolling in the correct courses can quite literally make or break if they're able to transfer into their chosen institution. And then once they've transferred, if they'll be able to fulfill all the necessary course requirements for completion. The data on this slide highlights just how important this is. Before transferring, 2/3 of students said that they could use more advice on which courses are eligible for transfer. And this is just half the battle when it comes to transferring. 64% of students that actually transferred to a four-year institution say they could use more advice on which courses to take to fulfill major and graduation requirements. Similarly, 59% of transfer students at four-year institutions say they could use more advice on which courses are eligible for transfer credit. So I think this data certainly demonstrates a need for increasing course stick guidance to really make sure that we're setting students up for success.
Thank you, Bridget, for those insights. So now let's look at how we can understand student needs and think about how to create a schedule that best serves those needs. There is so much data we can use to help us build a schedule. And here we've listed out just a few of those metrics. So let's take a look at a few here together. First, course distribution throughout the day and week. I'm sure you've all experienced pain points here. Classes are packed between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And faculty may be reluctant to teach outside of those hours, even if that is when students need to take their courses. I was actually talking with one administrator, and she told me that a student working in her office expressed that she couldn't work on Tuesday and Thursday. When she asked why, the student said that all the classes that she needed to take were only offered Tuesday and Thursday and were jam-packed in classes all day long. Now, course distribution is also important in the context of program maps. For example, if a student signs up for a program with the expectation that they will take classes at night, all of the courses need to be offered at night as they progress. They shouldn't complete 2 terms, only to find out as they attempt to register for the 3rd term that none of the classes they need are offered at night. Course and section fill rates is another important metric to examine. Particularly in popular general education courses or milestone courses, institutions should look to see if all sections offered are consistently at capacity. If they are, that may be an indication that not all students are able to access these courses when they need to, which you might also be able to see through waitlist numbers. Now, I won't go over each data point here, but the questions listed on the slides are a good starting point to see if students can indeed access all the courses they need as they progress along their path. Now, love to hear from you again directly about what data points you're thinking about when it comes to creating your course schedule. So just launch the poll again like earlier, and we leave it open for about 60 seconds or so. Feel free to select multiple answers here. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing your insights here. And we have some strong winners in terms of the data points that you're all looking at to inform your course schedule. And so the first one we're seeing with 60% of people is course distribution throughout day and week. So yeah, absolutely makes sense as we just discussed. I think you're all aware of those bottlenecks already, probably whether it's throughout the day for specific days or for specific times of the day. So I'm glad you're able to look at that already. Looking at some others, enrollment at program and course level. So that's great. We love to see when institutions have access to the data to build the schedule. Sometimes the data, it can be disconnected from the course schedulers and the registrar department. So this is great to see that you do have access to those latest enrollment numbers when it comes to the specific programs and courses that you're looking at. A few others that I see: course and section fill rates. So yeah, as we mentioned, looking in the past here of courses that might have been overfilled or underfilled in the past, and how you're going to be able to adjust that for upcoming terms by being proactive with your offerings. Then finally, time to completion and enrollment trends by course modality. So yeah, I think we've all realized the importance, especially since COVID, of looking at course modality in particular, especially if you're looking at those fill rates. Those fill rates might be drastically different depending on the modality of the course. So if you have a whole cohort of students that is now joining the program online, make sure that you're offering that course online and not only in person, so the students can have access to it. Bridget, we'd love to hear if you have any other thoughts on these answers that we got here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the good news is here, it looks like, the majority of folks are looking at, some combination of data points when creating their course schedule. So something that we really love to see. It also looks like there are definitely some good opportunities here. I think, like Claire mentioned, thinking about course modality post-COVID, that's just becoming more and more important. And it looks like we have just over a third of folks looking at that. So that definitely seems like, an area of increased focus, going into the future. Another one that really jumped out to me here was data from degree audits. I think this is so huge because you can see, where your current students are currently at, and then what courses they're likely to need to take in future terms. So I think that just really helps provide some more real-time data as opposed to just looking at trends that we've seen historically. So I think those are the ones that probably jump out the most to me.
Thank you. And absolutely, as you know, here at CourseDog, we're pretty passionate about leveraging actual degree audit data and pathway data to make those projections. So certainly very excited to see that that's already ongoing at some of your institutions. So now let's dive into how your schedule is designed to accommodate students. So we just talked about how certain students are more impacted by the course schedule. So now I want to talk a little bit about some scheduling strategies to ensure that you are meeting those student needs. I'm going to begin and talk about block scheduling. So block scheduling, as you likely know, enables students to take all of the courses that they need within a specified time period. For example, a student may take all the courses they need during a preset block of 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. or 6 to 9 p.m. Now, block scheduling can have many benefits. When asked in a survey, overall 71% of students found value in block scheduling and or learning communities. Some of those benefits included making it easier to choose classes and saving time for registering for courses. Outside of these benefits found in the survey, it can also certainly help reduce the amount of time students have to spend on campus between classes. And that's particularly important for students with outside responsibilities, such as a job or caretaking, that don't give them the luxury of staying on campus all day between classes. Now, for the final section, we're going to walk through creating and advertising accessible degree maps. First, we'll go through some essentials to include in those program maps outside of just listing course sequences. Next, we'll touch on some accessibility guidelines. And finally, we'll talk about the importance of having consistent information about your program maps, no matter where a student is looking. Now, we've seen that when a lot of folks initially think of a program map, they think of a list of courses. And that's how I initially thought of it at first when I first heard the term as well. Now, this is certainly important and one of the major purposes of creating program maps. However, a map can and should contain more than just a list of courses. First, job information. This is essential to help students see the connection between the program and future employment. There are many places you can find that labor market information. even such as public sources like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or through labor market analytics providers like Latcast. I will say not all labor market sources are equal, so just make sure the information you're linking your students to is relevant, accurate, and detailed enough. Now, another one is listing recommended minimum grades. This really helps students understand what they need to achieve specifically to be successful in the program, or perhaps even be admitted into the program in the first place. Additionally, highlighting the target audience of the program map is also essential, especially if a program has multiple maps. For example, some institutions choose to build slightly different program maps that take into account the different requirements of transfer institutions. And so, for instance, a student at a California community college may need to complete different requirements depending on if they are planning to transfer to a CSU or UC system campus. The last item I'll highlight here is milestone actions. Most program maps will note key milestone courses that students need to complete. But this is also an opportunity to remind students of milestone actions. These actions may, for instance, include meeting with an advisor before registering for the next term, or even registering for graduation itself. Now, obviously, this can quickly become a lot of information to display in one place. And so this is where it's helpful to see how other institutions have structured their program maps to kind of get a feel for different types of formats and what makes the most sense for your institution. Now, let's talk a little bit about making these maps actually accessible to all students. So an essential part of any discussion about accessibility should always include making sure students of all abilities can access resources built for them. I listed just a few considerations here to make sure students can access program maps that live online specifically. Now, some of those considerations include making sure online program maps are compatible with functionalities such as screen reader, navigation by keyboard, and screen magnification. I'll also note that, especially with this generation, your team should make sure that these functionalities don't just work on desktop navigation, but also on mobile and tablet devices. And I know this can be overwhelming, so to make sure you aren't missing anything here, just consider working with your IT office or student accessibility office to make sure you're meeting the most up-to-date standards. So the last topic I want to highlight here is that program maps live in more than one place, so it is key to ensure consistency across locations to prevent confusion. I think the catalog is the first place that many of us think of when we think about where we house our curriculum and program maps. The catalog does represent the public contract between the institution and the student for the requirements and policies that they must follow to successfully complete their program. So this is absolutely key, crucial information, but there's also a couple of other places that students do access program information. Now, the website is a big one. Students are likely to do a Google search for what they're looking for before even navigating from an institution's homepage in search of that information. The website also serves as an advertising tool for prospective students considering your institution and potential programs. Finally, if your institution uses a student degree planner tool, it is typically where students go to plan their schedule for upcoming terms. It is where they chart out their course and create a plan that makes sense for their individual circumstances. And so it is key that all three of these mediums present the same information to prevent confusion through conflicting information and make sure that students don't get off track or take unproductive credits. Now, before we wrap up, let's just talk a little bit about the role that CourseDoc plays in the space and the problems that it can help you solve. Our mission at CourseDoc is to break down student barriers through integrated academic operations. We understand that for student success initiatives to be successful on campus, they must be holistic, just as your academic operations must be. And so in our academic operations platform, you can create and manage your whole curriculum, such as courses, programs, and of course, program maps. That most up-to-date curriculum data then gets displayed on a modern student-facing catalog, accessible as well. You're also able to schedule those courses using our academic and event scheduling tool that takes into account not only faculty preferences, standard meeting patterns, and actual student data to help you create an optimal schedule that enables students to stay on track to graduation, as well as optimizes your resources. And finally, like we touched on earlier, you're able to leverage reports and predictive analytics on course demand that uses not only your historical data, but your degree audit data as well. And all of this happens together, in a user-friendly, easy-to-use platform that reads and pushes data back to your student information system to really allow you to focus on student success.
Awesome. Thanks, Claire. Well, I think we can go ahead and move into the Q&A portion of today. So if folks want to go ahead and submit questions through the Q&A, we can go ahead and take those. So we'll give everyone a few seconds to kind of gather their thoughts and maybe go type in any questions that they might have. All right, so it looks like we got one question here asking if we're going to have a webinar about our online catalog. Yes, that's a great question. We do host webinars pretty frequently, but our team can get in touch with you with some more specific information about the catalog if you're interested in that. So thanks for that question. Claire, one question I'm seeing here, I'm curious, when it comes to using degree audit data to inform program maps, can you talk to us a little bit more about, what that means in terms of particularly thinking about, successful pathways for students?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're able to ingest your degree audit data. And so what we look at is for your currently enrolled student body, what programs they're enrolled in and which requirements they've already met, as well as which requirements they have yet to meet. And so looking at that data, we're able to help you make projections for the kind of courses that you should be offering and the number of sections and seats that you should be offering for upcoming term. The other thing that we're able to look at by looking at your actual degree audit data is looking at, in the past, how students have gone through their degree. And so by doing that, we're able to identify kind of differences between what you might be recommending in terms of your requirements and program maps for your programs and what students are actually doing in practice. And so this might be helpful data for advisors to look at specific students, as well as for you to take into account as you're going through that program mapping exercise, seeing where you might actually be straying away from reality of what students are doing.
Absolutely. I'm seeing a couple more questions here. A couple relating to scheduling data and degree audit data. I'm seeing one here about if our program maps leverage degree audit data from systems like Ellucian DegreeWorks. Claire, I think you can probably speak to that one.
So yes, I can answer that also about specific degree audit data. So yes, DegreeWorks is the biggest one that we integrate with, that we see. So for most Banner and some college schools, we read the degree audit data from DegreeWorks, and from others, we can also read it directly from the SIS, such as PeopleSoft or Colleague, for example. So yeah, we're absolutely able to ingest that, and then you're able to build and manage all your program maps in CourseDoc as well.
Great. Again, kind of relating to that scheduling and degree audit data here, I see a question asking if CourseDoc has a feature for the shortest path based on that data for individual students.
Very interesting question. So I'm guessing, yeah, talking about the shortest path for a student to go from starting their program all the way to completion. So yeah, this is absolutely the kind of data that you'll be able to see and actionable insights that you'll be able to see surfaced in our tool, and would be happy to follow up with some information on that. So we're able to identify all the places where you might have extra credits that you don't need to be recommending or that you should not be requiring as part of a program that you could cut down, or those kind of optimal paths that you could be suggesting for your students. So absolutely, that's the kind of insights that we're able to provide with the data we're gathering.
Great. I know something we touched on in our presentation was about, creating maps for multiple pathways, such as double majors or minors. Claire, would you be able to speak to that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say we've seen different institutions do it a little differently. But I have seen it where there is value in creating individual maps for those combinations, specifically the combinations that are most common. And so you might have a program map for the program all up or the core requirements of a program or a major. But then what we've seen a lot of institutions do is then kind of break it down by student cohort. So let's say very popular major and concentration combination or major and minor combination. You might want to build and display for students a program map specifically for that combination. And you can display, under the different programs that would impact. So we've definitely seen different levels of granularity. And again, it's kind of finding the right balance between not overwhelming students with too much data, but also being able to provide that most accurate and relevant information for the student groups.
Absolutely, that's super helpful. I'm seeing a question here about our integrations, particularly when it comes to degree audits. I know we talked a little bit about DegreeWorks, but Claire, are there any other integrations it would be helpful to call out in terms of who we partner with?
So yeah, as I think I mentioned a few maybe since then, but so yeah, I'd say DegreeWorks, Colleague, PeopleSoft are some of the biggest ones. I'd say feel free to reach out to us directly if you have questions about other specific ones. There's a lot that we can accommodate. And we always push things back to your SIS as well. And so there's all that can happen through SIS integrations as well. So be happy to dive into any specific integrations as a follow-up.
Great. Well, I'm loving how active this Q&A was here. I feel like we don't always get as many questions. So love to see that. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to pop those in the Q&A. And we're also happy to follow up with folks afterwards if they have more specific questions for us. I'm not currently seeing any other questions in the Q&A right now, so we can probably go ahead and wrap up a couple minutes early, give everyone a few minutes back in their day. But before we say our goodbyes, we just wanted to do one last final poll here, just kind of for our own internal knowledge. We won't be, publicly sharing the poll results or anything like that. So if you could just go ahead and take a second to select yes or no here, that would be awesome. All right, well, once everyone has had a chance to select that, I think we can be on our way. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. Really enjoyed this conversation, seeing the poll results, and as I just mentioned, our very active Q&A. So thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.